Hi guys, the purpose of this video is to walk you through the structure of an essay, and the focal point in this lecture is going to be on kind of like a personal narrative, day in the life of me essay. I absolutely want you to apply this to your first piece of writing, but just know that this structure is really an academic essay structure that while I'll be elaborating specifically on how you can apply it to your day in the life of me essay, you can apply this to any academic essay that you're asked to write. Of course, unless your instructor is giving you different guidelines, but this is a very basic essay structure that we're going to walk through, and even though it's basic, you can take it and you can spin it for you. One of the things that I think a lot of students have questions about is just like the concept of, if these are the rules of writing, do I have to follow these rules 100% for every single thing that I write? The answer is no. I've always told students, once you know the rules, then you can start to effectively break them. That's kind of the way that it is with grammar as well, but you have to know the rules first. A lot of the writing that you'll see in journalism and creative writing doesn't follow this structure, and that's because this is really for academic writing. So the college essay, as you get into thesis papers, and if you go on to higher than this education, you'll find that these structures still exist, but they are developed and more elaborate and more complex. So these are still the foundations, and as you go forward, you can break them. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the introduction. This is kind of what sets up your writing. One of the things that I tried to stress in the overview for a day in the life of me essay is that I don't want you to just get started in your very first sentence saying something like, the first thing I do in my day is wake up at 6:30 in the morning, or I wake up with a cup of coffee, or whatever. I want you to introduce your subject matter, and your subject matter is you. Your subject matter is your daily life. So you have to figure out a really good way to slowly kind of wade into the waters of your daily life, which is going to be the topic of your body paragraphs. And so the way that you figure that out is by or how you present that to your reader really is by a hook sentence or an attention grabber. And that's going to happen in the first sentence or two or three of your introduction. So there are a couple of different styles of hook sentences. You can provide a surprising fact, you can tell a small story, and now because you're writing sort of a personal narrative style essay, you're really telling stories about your life throughout. So this might fit quite nicely, or you might find that it's too similar to your body paragraph style and you want to do something different. You can ask a question, and you can provide a quote. And whatever you do, you just want to pick whatever is going to feel right for you. Shocking facts and statistics are often really effective for argumentative essays or for papers where you're going to be doing a lot of research, because those facts and statistics are usually numbers based and surprise the reader in some way, get them wanting to read more. Stories work well where you're kind of trying to present maybe an emotional reaction to the reader. Again, these can work really well for argumentative essays where you tell a story about someone which kind of pulls the reader's heartstrings a little bit and wants them to know more. This kind of opening introduction story can fit really well with your essay as well. Questions work, but some instructors don't want you to ask a question to start your essay. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that sometimes with questions, they can feel really unrelated to the content, or they can feel kind of superficial. For example, a question that asks directly the reader and having to think about something is usually not as effective, because that question can't be answered by the end of your essay. So for example, if you asked a question like, what does a day in your typical life look like? You're not going to be able to answer that by the end of your essay, because that's only a question that your reader can answer. So that might not be most effective. A question, though, that you would be able to answer by the end of your day, or excuse me, by the end of your essay, would be a better style for your essay. I can't think of one off the top of my head for this kind of day in the life of me personal narrative, but there's absolutely questions out there that can be effective. And you also you kind of want to gauge what your teacher appreciates, if you're going to apply these notes to other assignments. I have an asterisk here next to quote because I feel like beginning essays with quotes are also my least favorite way for students to start an essay. And the reason for that is just because most of the time students will begin with a quote that maybe they like, but it doesn't really pertain to their writing as much, or they will have just Googled a random quote that fits the subject matter of their essay, but really they aren't able to work in any significant way. And then it feels just kind of like a very superficial way to begin the essay. So if you're going to begin with a quote, it needs to 100% relate, and you need to comment on it before you move forward with your introduction. I mean, if you begin with a quote, it really needs to be a lead-in to your ideas, in so much as you are segueing and transitioning very gently away from that quote and really commenting on it and exploring the concepts of the quote before you get into the rest of your introduction. Or you come back to the quote at some point later on. So just be careful in my class in particular with beginning with quotes. I'm definitely not telling you that you can't do them, but you just want to be careful with them. If there are other ways that you like to begin your essays too, can let us know about those. But these are the big four that I can think of, the ones that I see the most as being effective. Let's see, if you ever write about literature, kind of just getting started with a summary of the text that you're writing on can be an effective way to begin as well. All right, so the next part of the introduction that's really important is background information. Even if your hook sentence or attention grabber is multiple sentences, you want to have something in between your hook and your thesis statement. And the key question that you can ask yourself is, what does my reader need to know right now in order to better understand the ideas that I'll present in my body paragraphs? So if these are ideas about you, if these are things about your day, if this is an argumentative essay that you're writing and the reader needs to understand government policy or needs to understand some kind of foundation, then that's the background information of your introduction is the best place to put that information. Here, I think for an essay that's about you, I would give some relevant details about you that maybe don't have a place within your body paragraphs. But I think that for the most part, if you have the right hook and you're working into a thesis statement by the end of your introduction, your middle sentences of background information will kind of come out naturally, and you should let that flow of writing happen and then go back and edit. So the last sentence of your introduction should be your thesis statement. That's where I will be looking for your thesis statement, is all the way at the end of that paragraph. Basic information regarding a thesis is that it states the main idea of your essay, and so in this case the main idea would be a typical day in your life. And like we talked about in the overview video for the Day in the Life of Me essay, you really want to make sure that you've selected specific focal points that you will address, and you should pick one focal point per body paragraph. And so if you, let's say for example, you had that standard 5-paragraph essay, which is not the only thing that you can do, but if you did, then your thesis statement would list out in a simplified way what those focal points were going to be. The list that you provide, the focal points that you provide in your thesis statement, will reflect the main idea and also should reflect the structure of your essay. So if whatever you will address first in your body paragraphs, that's what you should write first in your thesis statement. And the other thing is you want to avoid statements of intention. So a statement of intention is an a sentence that says anything like, in this essay, I will tell you about a day in the life of me. When you have like futuristic verb tenses, this essay will, or even reflecting like language that reflects your essay itself, saying this essay discusses, this essay is about. You want to avoid all of those types of languages. So at this point, for those of you who have already written your essay, I want you to go back, read your thesis statement. First, identify it. Do you have one? That's important. But second, read through it and make sure it's not a statement of intention. Make sure that you're not saying anything like, this essay will talk about, in my essay, I tell you about, this essay will be about, whatever. Avoid all of those at all costs. A thesis statement that would be effective for this essay in particular, the day in the life of me, would say something like, a typical day in my life consists of waking up early, being in school for 12 hours, and ending with watching movies every day or something like that, right? So you just get to the point, you're saying the main idea of your essay, and I should be able to read your thesis statement and know kind of exactly what your body paragraphs are going to be about. Body paragraphs. So again, I want to reiterate that having a focus for each one of your body paragraphs is really, really important. The way that you reflect the focus of your body paragraph is through a topic sentence. And this is the very first sentence of every body paragraph. This is something that I stress so much throughout our course because a topic sentence can make or break your paragraph, especially when this essay is challenging because we're writing an essay where to answer the prompt, you could say, I wake up, I do this, I do that, then I do this, then I do this, then I go to school, then I learn, then I'm in math for this many hours, I come home, I do my homework. Okay, so the problem with that is that it's really unfocused. You are working chronologically through your day, but each paragraph doesn't have a particular focus. So if you're finding that you have different spaces where you spend your time, for example, at home, at school, and maybe at work, you might, let's say there's a day where you start at home, you go to school for a couple of hours, you go back home for a little bit, you go back to school, you go to work, you go back home. You would bunch all of the time when you're at home into a paragraph. You'd bunch all of the times when you're at school into a paragraph, and you'd bunch that one time when you're at work in a paragraph. So even though it's not following exactly and perfectly chronologically, each one of your body paragraphs has a focus where, again, you're focusing on what you do at home, what you do at school, and what you do at work. Remember, you do not have to work through your day chronologically. You just have to tell me what your typical day is like. So if a topic sentence is going to give you the opportunity to tell your reader the main idea of that paragraph, it should have a key word or a key phrase that is repeated in the concluding sentence, and that's going to be the final sentence of your body paragraph. Topic sentences are so important. I should be able to read the first sentence of every one of your body paragraphs and not read anything else in that body paragraph and understand what the paragraph is going to be about. So one of the best indicators, and something I would really, really encourage you all to do, is read your thesis statement and read the first sentence of each of your body paragraphs and make sure that they reflect each other, that your body paragraphs give that topic sentence style focal point and your thesis covers all of those ideas. And if that's not the case, then I would want you to kind of work on revising. That could be small revisions where you have a focus, but you don't reflect that in a topic sentence, or bigger revisions where you realize you don't have a focus in that paragraph at all. In addition to making sure that your topic sentence effectively and clearly reflects the main idea or main focal point of that body paragraph, you also want to make sure that you have supporting details. So supporting details can happen in a number of formats. I'll go through all of them, and then I'll talk about some specifics that you might consider for this essay. Of course, personal stories in the right prompt can be effective supporting details. For this essay, absolutely, personal stories are exactly what I'm looking for. There are going to be essays that we have in this class and essays in future classes where you can't write about yourself at all. So just make sure that you fully understand the writing prompt before incorporating a personal story as a supporting detail. Examples are another really great way to help provide supporting details, and examples for this essay in the form of personal stories are wonderful, but those aren't the only types of examples that you can use. You can come up with an example from something that you've read. You can come up with an example from something that you know about, an experience that someone you know has had. You can come up with an example from something that you've researched. Of course, these would all be for other types of essays, not one about yourself, but examples are a great supporting detail. Quotes from research are some of the best ways to develop your ideas. And that's really what the supporting details are doing. They are developing your ideas. Explanations, elaborations, logical reasonings. If you are writing an argument, then you're going to be using a lot of these types of supporting details where you might provide a quote from research as an example, but then you need to talk about it. You want to make sure that every supporting detail you provide is really completely developed and explored in your body paragraph. And then, of course, the other thing that you can do is facts and statistics. And sometimes these things will overlap. Like I said before, an example can be in the form of a personal story, and also a quote can provide facts and statistics. So there's a lot of overlap that can happen here in your supporting details. If you are writing a body paragraph for your essay, A Day in the Life of Me, you want to make sure first that you fully understand the focal point of that body paragraph. So one example that I can give you here is, if you remember back to the video on, or even just the assignment sheet on A Day in the Life of Me, kind of going over the goals of that essay, one of the organizational suggestions was maybe the music that you listen to throughout the day. So for me, I would probably have a body paragraph where I talk about that sort of high energy, loud, what I always call angsty emo music that I listen to usually when I'm in the car on my way to work, because it just gets me kind of pumped up and energized for my day. So some things that I could write about after I provide my topic sentence, and my topic sentence might look something like, the majority of my day is spent listening to high energy emo music. Okay, now I need to elaborate on that. Yes, I can just say that and that's fine. My readers can move on, but they really, if I'm going to focus a whole body paragraph on that, they need to know what I'm talking about. So there's a couple of things I can do. I can give examples of the type of music I'm talking about. I can provide bands or even specific songs, and I can elaborate on that. So what if my reader doesn't really understand what angsty emo music means? I give a couple of examples, but then I might want to talk about or describe to them how the music sounds. The other thing that I can do is provide personal stories. My reader might be wondering, well, how did you come to even listen to this type of music? And I could provide personal stories from, say, my high school days, where this music was more heavily involved in my life, even more so than it is now. And then the other thing I can do is explain and elaborate on how that music makes me feel, and just the fact that it gets me really pumped up. So I can very well develop that topic sentence into multiple supporting details with multiple sentences per supporting detail to really flesh out the focus that I'm working on here, which is that angsty emo music is in my life on a daily basis. When you're finished developing your ideas, you want to make sure that you have a concluding sentence. Concluding sentences, I think, are the most overlooked portion of a body paragraph, but they're really, really important because they recap the main idea. Imagine an author who has spent a very big space within their essay developing a paragraph. Sometimes those ideas can be really intricate and very complex, so it's great to provide a sentence just kind of wrapping up that main idea. This is where a lot of students will say, okay, my paragraphs, it sounds like I'm writing in circles. My paragraphs are very repetitive. Most of the time when I hear students say that, I tell them that's a good feeling, especially if you don't feel confident in your own writing. If you feel like you are repeating yourself, and especially if you're doing it at the beginning and the end, writing is cyclical. We have a topic sentence where we have a thesis statement that states our main idea. Then we go and state those main ideas again in body paragraphs. We develop those where we're really fleshing out the main idea. And we have topic sentence and concluding sentences that repeat those main ideas. So it is very much a repetitive process. You don't want your writing to sound repetitive, but some of the times if you feel like I'm just talking in circles, that might actually be a good feeling to have, especially if you don't feel confident with your own writing. So I don't know, there's maybe a very gray line there, one that's not super clear, but if you're feeling that way, don't jump to conclusions immediately and say that means you're a bad writer. Okay, so body paragraphs, just to recap, this would be my concluding sentence here. They need to have a focus that is very well developed in that paragraph. Then we are going to talk a little bit about conclusions, and conclusions for me as a writer are some of the more challenging things to write. The chapter in your textbook, A Student's Guide to Writing, I believe it is chapter 2, talks a little bit about conclusions and why they are so important, and I definitely encourage you, if you haven't already, to read that chapter. There's 2 things I need you to do in your conclusion. Restate your thesis in 1 to 2 sentences. Don't just copy and paste it from the introduction. Make sure that you rewrite it and you rework it so that you take into consideration the ideas you've presented in your body paragraphs. The other more important thing here is, so what? Why does what you've written matter? What is the purpose for relaying these ideas to your reader? And that's I think the hardest part about a conclusion is, especially when you've been given a prompt to write about. But why does it matter? I mean, these are some questions you can ask yourself for your Day in the Life of Me essay. Why is it important to put your day out there and share it with other people? Why would someone want to share their day with you? How does that make us better as humans? I mean, what might that be effective for? The only thing I can think of right now instantly is that when we know what other people are going through, we're better able to be compassionate and empathetic with them. And maybe there's something in that. I don't know. It's something to, I think, explore. But these are the notes for structure of an essay. One final thing that I want to do in this video, and by the way, you guys can find these notes in the FYI section for the week. But the other thing I want to do in this video is show you an example of what I do not want to see in your essay. Now, the example that I'm about to show you was not written for this essay prompt, so it works just fine for this girl's blog. But it's a great example of what I'm afraid of seeing, and it's something that I want you to compare your essays to. I'm not going to read through the whole thing. I can link it in the FYI section if you guys want to go in and read it, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and I'm going to explain why it's not working for this essay and why I'm worried that I'm going to get essays like this. So first of all, when you see an essay prompt that asks you to talk about a typical day in your life, like I have said many times before, there's always the desire to say, I start here, then I do this, then I do this, then I do these things, and just work through it chronologically. That is not going to, however, adhere to what the structure of an academic essay is, because it's not going to effectively give you the opportunity to write an introduction, a conclusion, and focused body paragraphs. So here's an example of what I don't want to see. And again, I'm not criticizing this author. I found this on the internet and I thought, oh, this is a great example of what I'm not looking for. All right, so in a typical day, she organizes her ideas. She has her morning routine, she has her day routine, and her night routine. And these would be good starting points if you did feel the need to organize your essay chronologically. You can have a paragraph about your morning, a paragraph about your day, and a paragraph about nighttime. But if there's a lot of repetitive concepts that you do in the morning and at night, or in the morning and during the day, then you might want to rethink your organization. So here this author talks about her alarm going off at 6:35, she lays in bed, she starts her beauty routine, she goes to the kitchen, she gets breakfast, and then she gets out of the house, she goes to work. Before work, she kind of stays in the car for a little bit. And then she watches a little bit of YouTube videos and she enjoys this quiet time before she gets into work. So the problem with this is that there's really no focus. Yes, she's talking about her morning, but she's breaking this up into, what is this, about 5 different paragraphs of various sizes. She's just kind of stopping at her various routine points and not really elaborating and developing. She also doesn't really have a topic sentence. She has a topic, her morning routine, but what is she saying about it? It would be really great if she could say something like, my morning routine is mostly calm, or my morning routine incorporates a lot of makeup, and then she can really elaborate on kind of how she gets like her face ready for the day or something like that. The other thing is that there are details that she incorporates in her day that we really don't need to know. She says she lays in bed for 5 to 10 minutes and then goes to the bathroom. But I don't really need to know that about you unless that's a focal point that helps you, or a detail that helps you develop a focal point. In this case, I think it could have been left out. And so she kind of goes through sort of this, I do this, it's very quick, it reads very fast, and it's very, as someone in my face-to-face class said, very choppy. It's kind of all over the place, and that's how it feels. And it's because she doesn't have an introduction, she doesn't have a conclusion, and she doesn't have a focal point for her body paragraphs. And in some cases, her paragraphs are just one sentence. So this is too, I like that phrase, all over the place, for the type of essay that I'm looking for. It's a great start. If you started here, if you did this as a brainstorm, I think this would help you. One of the things that I notice as I'm reading through her blog post here is that she really talks about her makeup routine. And I almost feel like, even though she has a morning routine and a night routine that differ, I almost feel like she could have had one paragraph, again, if she were writing for my essay, she could have had one paragraph where she just talks about makeup being important to her and that it's included in her daily routine. The other thing that she talks about is kind of writing in this thing she calls the 5-minute journal, and that's probably a brand or something, but that would be another thing where she writes in this journal on multiple occasions during the day. She could lump all of that into one body paragraph. So this is a great little page to just kind of read through really quickly and gauge and compare to your own writing. This is not what I'm looking for. A good place to brainstorm, a good place to start, but remember, you want to make sure that your final essay for this day in the life of me still follows academic writing conventions. And if you have any questions about that whatsoever, please don't hesitate, send me an email. I know some of you have probably already started working on this or have finished it, so just make sure that you've reviewed this video and compared and contrasted what you've written to the structure here that I'm looking for. Again, if anyone has any questions, my email is losburn, that's my first initial and my last name, @mitchellcc.edu.